Okay, welcome all. Today's share is going to be a continuation of a topic we started discussing a few weeks ago, and that is what the parameters of kanayis and hafganot and civil disobedience is according to the Torah. Now, one of the most dynamic examples of civil disobedience that existed is in the beginning of the state of Israel in the early 1950s. So the government passed a law, basically during the War of Independence in 1947 and 1948. So many of the different militia groups that participated in the battle had women amongst their ranks as well, and it was like a all hands on deck type of situation, and they all participated in the fighting. Now, when all these different militias folded up into the main institution, which eventually turned into the IDF. So the Knesset passed a law mandating that women be part of the brand new Israeli army as well. Now, this was something that obviously created a maelstrom, amongst the Haredim of the time, and this became known as Giyas Banas, the drafting of the girls, and it created a huge tumult. Now, the way I want to start discussing the sugya is it seems the main Rav who was leading the battle and actually charting the course and battling this decree was Ritzi Pesach Frank. Now, Avada, all the Gedalim of the day, the Chazon Ish, the Brisker Rav, Rav Bengis, the Chabina Rav, Risa Zalman, they were all big participants in this battle, but the one I think the tactician, so to speak, who was guiding the battle through its different stages, could be said was Ritzi Pesach Frank. Now, the Kol Korah that eventually came out, the Psak Din, was a short Kol Korah, and I'll read you from it. The Psak Din that they hung in the streets said Psak Din meis harabanim hagainim gedeli hadar in regards to Giyas Banas, and it says as follows: Das Torah b'negei legiyas habanas asher hu abizrayu shalechem mishleisha averis hachamuris shehu b'yehareg v'al yaver. Basically, with these gedeli harabanim paskind that being drafted into the IDF, into the secular IDF, especially in that time, was begeder apizrayu da'arayis, was begeder, me'en of arayis, and the din is that it's Yehareg V'Yaver, and therefore they paskined that this shaila, the din is Yehareg V'Yaver. Now, on this Kol Korah was signed Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, Rav Zelig Reuven Bengis, Rav Zalman Meltzer, and the Chabina Rav. These are the four signators of this Kol Korah. The Chazon Ish, Ivada, everyone knows, was highly involved in this, ad kedei kach that Ben Gurion went to his house in Bnei Brak to discuss it with him. Now, from the meeting, from the details of the meeting, even though there was no one really in the room, I think the meeting just consisted of David Ben Gurion, the Chazon Ish, and Yitzchak Navon, the secretary of David Ben Gurion. But over time, the Chazon Ish told some people stuff, and Yitzchak Navon published it and shared it. And it seems that they never actually got to discussing the actual Teichen Advarim of Giyas Banas. So even though I think the imprimatur for the meeting was Giyas Banas, was the drafting of the girls, but the meeting with the Chazon Ish did not actually discuss the Giyas Banas between Ben Gurion and the Chazon Ish. So I'm going to leave that meeting aside, and eventually I'll talk about another meeting that happened between Rabbanim and the Chazon Ish, where they did discuss the sugya of Giyas Banas more in depth. But first I want to behandle this a little bit. So this Kol Korah was published where it says it's Yehareg V'Yaver. Now, Mizak Dibber, and it's brought down different people quoted from the Chazon Ish. The Chazon Ish said that the din of Giyas Banas is Yehareg V'Yaver. The hashkafa of Giyas Banas is Yehareg V'Yaver, that you have to give your life, you have to sacrifice your life for it, and maybe even lahalacha, it's Yehareg V'Yaver. So the Chazon Ish kind of was saying that the Gedei Rabbanim are saying that it's apizrayu da'arayis and it's Yehareg V'Yaver is maybe a little bit of hyperbole. Maybe it's a little bit of a hyperbolic method of speech to convey the severity and the seriousness of the issue. But Ula, he said, it is actually Yehareg V'Yaver, and one must give up the life for it. Now, when this Kol Korah was published, so the nusach of this Kol Korah was written by Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank. They had a meeting in Rav Frank's house in Yerushalayim between these Gedei Harabanim, and at the conclusion of the meeting, Rav Tzvi Pesach sat down and he wrote up this nusach for the Kol Korah. Now, he gave it to a close Talmud of his, Rabbi Yisrael David Grossman, the father of Yitzchak Grossman from Migdal Emek. He was the Yeshiva of Karlini Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. He was a young man at the time. He participated in the meeting, and the Chabinim gave him the Ksav Kol Korah and asked him to take it to a printer to get it printed. Now, he went to the printer, and the printer said, "This is a business killer. I'm not touching this." Next thing you know, the Mishtara will come. They'll arrest me. They'll imprison me for publishing this, and I don't want to be involved in this. So, to which they came to an agreement that as long as the printer said, as long as if when the Mishtara shows up to my house, I'm able to tell them who the one who gave me this thing to print is, then, and my hands will be clean, then I'm okay to do it. So reluctantly, Rabbi Yisrael David Grossman was maskim that in the eventuality that the Mishtara shows up to the print house and demands to know who printed it, he's going to take the fall. And Kachava, a short time after this Kolkeir was published in Plaster Rule of Yerushalayim, they were able to ascertain who the publisher is, and they showed him to this publisher's house, and they said, why would you do this? He turned in Yisrael David Grossman. They arrested Yisrael David Grossman, and they took him to the Russian compound in Yerushalayim, and he was imprisoned. And, they interrogated him, and Rabbi Grossman wrote about this later on, about all the different tactics that were used on him to try to get the interrogation. But he sent a message to, the koil went out that Yisrael David Grossman was in prison, and a tremendous macha was staged outside of the Russian compound that had the participation of no less than Briskerov. Briskerov, who went to almost no hafkanot in his life, participated in this hafkanah outside the Russian compound to protest the arrest of Yisrael David Grossman in regards to him publicizing the great negatives of Giyas Banas. Briskerov went, Mrs. Zalman went, the Chibina went, Ritzi Pesach went. The newspapers of the day reported it, that the cumulative age of the dais at the hafkanah of the Rabbanim exceeds 450 years. Meaning, if you tally up all their years lived, it's a 450-year-old table. Meaning, this was the best in the Shenstev of all the Rabbanim Yerushalayim, the Rabbanim in Klal Yisrael, who went to participate in this hafkanah, and ultimately, Rabbi Grossman gets let out of prison. Now, it's interesting, just a tidbit. When Rabbi Grossman took this Kolkeira from Ritzi Pesach, and he went to get it signed, so he went to Mrs. Zalman's house, and Rebbe Tzimbeila Hinda opened the door for him, and she perused the content of the Kolkeira that he was coming to get a signature from her husband for, and she said, absolutely not, I would not let my husband sign in it. He's an old man, he's been sick his whole life. The last thing he needs is to get drawn into something that the police are going to be busy with, they'll be all over him. Absolutely not, he can't sign in this. And Rebbe Zalman, being the gentle person that he was, he said, okay, listen, let me give you to drink, to eat. You have my support, even if I'm not going to be able to sign on it. And some safe, as he was walking Yisrael David Grossman out of his apartment, he said, no, I can't let this go without signing. Bring me a pen, I'm going to sign, and come what may, I'm throwing my name behind this. When they brought the zettel to the Chibina to sign, the Chibina looked at the nusach, he asked who wrote it. They told him it's Ritzi Pesach Frank wrote it. He said, okay, then it needs no further b'dika, and he signed on. So Shia, the Gedalim of the day, signed on to this Kolkeira that pronounced the Inyan of Giyas Banas as a Harag Yavar, and therefore you have to be Meiser Nefesh for it, and no one's allowed to join. Now the Chazon Ish, as we mentioned earlier, maybe hedged a little bit on the actuality of this being a Harag Yavar Ladina, but this was the posture taken by the Gedolei Harabanim in Yerushalayim. Now, at the time, there was a group of Mishlachas of Rabbanim from America who came to Eretz Yisrael to try to see if they could maybe get some sort of settlement. And they met with Ritzi Pesach Frank, and they were pushing him a little bit on Mechates Yitzhar Yavar, and what's your makar that women can't be in the army, who says, and ultimately what they conveyed to him is that maybe granted there's makom to be machmer on your Yahar Yavar over here, meaning maybe this is not Shuras Hadin, the Ikar Hadin, maybe you're not mechayiv to be Meiser Nefesh, to not join the army, you're a Jewish girl. But Zichar, there's makom l'hachmer to be Meiser Nefesh, not to join the army. But their taina to him was to leave this open to young girls, for them to decide if maybe this is something worth giving their life for. Maybe that's a responsibility that can't be entrusted to the judgment of young girls. Meaning that's something maybe, even if you hold that there's makom to be machmer, you shouldn't entrust that to them. Now, to which Ritzi Pesach retorted, and he said, you came here to try to help. It's clear that you can't help. I ask you at least not to be mazik. It's clear you're of no use to the Mulchama of Giyas Banas to get this law that was passed, taken out of circulation, but at least get out of the way and don't mess up the maracha that we have over here. Now, just to give, so what is the background of what they're referring to? Let's give the basic background. And this is a bakanta sugi to most people. We'll give the basic background of the sugi of Harag Yavar and what these Rabbanim were suggesting. So now the Gemara in Sanhedrin, the Fayin Dal and Mid Aleph, it's a famous the Gemara. The Gemara says, Amr Rav Yochanan Mishum Rav Shimon Bar Yotzadok, Nimnu v'gamru ba'aliyas beis nitza belud. They were Chazal when Nimnu v'gamru. They counted up the numbers and they made a psak. Kol aver sheb'Torah, any aver in the Torah. Im oimrim la'adam avar v'al. If they tell a person, violate the avera and don't be killed, ya'avar v'al yehareg. The halacha is you should be over said avera and don't allow yourself to be killed. Chutz. These three averis chamuris, on those that a person has to rather give up his life instead of being killed. So then the Gemara asks a question on this, and the Gemara brings him a car. It says, Tanya Amr Bishmol Minayin Shem Amr Leil Adam Avoid Avoidis Kechavim Val Tahareg Minayin Sheyavid Val Yereg. How do you know that if a person was pushed and they tell him be Avoid Avoidis Kechavim or die, that he should be Avoid Avoidis Kechavim and not die? Tamalemer V'chai Behem V'lei Shiyamas Behem. The mitzvahs were given so that we should live and flourish and thrive through them, and not that we should die through them. Yachal Afil for Hasya Tamalemer V'lei Sechal Lo Shem Kachi V'Niktashti. So okay, and then it continues. The Gemara says, the Gemara brings many drashas, but this is the long and the short, and this is a din that everybody knows, every child knows, that there's only 3 mitzvahs that are Yaharig Vayavar, 3 lavim, dafka, not even I say 3 lavim that are Yaharig Vayavar. Gila Rayas, V'Tazar, Shvichas Damim, those are the 3 lavim that a person has to sacrifice his life for. Anything more than that, a person is not supposed to sacrifice his life for. Now, there's a Bakanta Machlekes Rishonim, and the Torah brings this down in Yeridei and Simon Kuf Nun Zayin, and I'll read the Torah. The Torah says as follows: Kol Averis Chutz Me Aved Zara V'Gilei Rayis V'Shvichas Damim. Any Avera aside from these 3, Sha'imrim Leila Adam Shi'aver Aleim, they tell a person he should be over in them, O Yeharig, or at the penalty of death. Imhu B'Tzina, if it's private and it's not going to be a public Chilul Hashem. Im Yirtza, if he so chooses, Yaver Val Yeharig, he's allowed to be over in these Averis and not be killed. But says the Torah, Im Yirtza L'Hachmer Alatzmei, if he wants to be Machmer on himself and give up his life, Liharig Rashoy, he's allowed to. He's not called an Avarian, like it's not suicidal to give up your life, not to violate any other mitzvah. And says the Torah, Ve'emuv Farhesya, if it's something that's public and it's going to be a Chil Hashem, which Pashas means in front of 10 other Jews, and Chayiv Liharig V'Yavar, even on a basic thing. But by Medvar Mum, when is that? Shagai Mechavan Lavir Eldas, and the Torah continues. Now, this is, you said, this is the Rambam famously paskins that based on this Gemara, that if someone wants to give up his life on these other mitzvahs, he's not allowed to. Only b'shas hashmad. The Rambam says that v'itmar sham b'gemara kiyaser avdimi, only shas hashmad, but shalei b'shas hashmad, one is not permitted to give up his life for any one of these other mitzvahs, only on the mitzvahs, the gimel chamuras of Yaharig Vayavar. Everything else he's not permitted to give up his life on. But there's other Rishonim, in Taisvis it's brought down like this, and there's a Ran like this, and there's a Marik, that seem to say clearly that even though the Chiv for Yaharig Vayavar is only on the Gimel Mitzvahs Chamuras, but certainly even on other mitzvahs, befrat if they border on Chil Hashem and there's a makom to make a Kiddush Hashem by sacrificing your life for them, one is permitted to be machmer on himself and give up his life even for another mitzvah. So now this is the conversation, so to speak, that was happening, that was transpiring between the two Pesach and these other Rabbanim. Now just to note, the Shulchan Aruch, the Mechaber in Simon Kuf Nun Zayin, in Yeridei, the Mechaber paskins as follows, and this is the din in Shulchan Aruch, it says as follows: Kol Averis Sheb'Torah, all Averis in the Torah, Chutz Me Avodas Kechavim V'Gilei Rayis V'Shvichas Damim, setting aside these 3 Gimel Chamuras of V'Dazar, Gilei Rayis, and Shvichas Damim, Im Oimrim Loila Adam, if they tell a person Sheyavar Aleim Yeharig, that he should either violate them or be killed, Imhu B'Tzina Yavar V'Al Yeharig. Now this is a diak halashon that some place can point out. It's a little different than the Torah. The Torah says that if a person wants to, he's im yirtze, he's rashoy, kilu, to be violating these averes and not give up his life. Shulchan Aruch says it more of a din, kipshutay, that imhu b'tzina yaver v'al like a directive, not stam memeg over zayin. That the halacha is yaver v'al but the Shulchan Aruch follows up and it says v'im yirtze l'hachmar alatzeh v'laharig. If one wants to be machmar on himself and be killed, rashoy, he's allowed to, provided and this is the day of Rabbeinu Yerucham and the Ran and Taisvis and the Marik, that a person is permitted to give up his life even for other mitzvahs. Now the Shach brings down that some place can paskin like the Rambam, that the Chomi Shadina Lavar Vayarig V'Nereg V'Leyavar Harizim Eschayev V'Nafshe, which is very harsh. This is what the Rambam says, that any person who's not mechuyev to give up his life, i.e. meaning he's supposed to violate the Yisr, and he chooses to give up his life instead, is Yischayev V'Nafshe. He's maybe, which potentially, according to some, means he loses Elam Haba, meaning it's not a simple thing. But and V'chein Das Namuk Yosef, V'chein Yer Das Ramban, V'sevet Teres Adam, V'vi Haran. So the Shach brings down that it's a grace of machlekes. But Lamaisa in Shulchan Aruch state and in Torah state that if a person wants, he's able to be machmar on himself and give up his life even for things that he's not mechuyev to. So now this, so to speak, was the conversation that was transpiring between this Meshlachas of Rabbanim from Chutz La'aretz and Ritzi Pesach in his study in Yerushalayim. These Rabbanim were saying, granted, there's makom in halacha to be machmer on oneself, to give up their lives even for a mitzvah, for an aver they're not mechuyev to. But that's for someone on a Ramah. That's for someone who's choosing to be Meiser Nefesh and a Grace Eifen, someone who's on a high level who's making this decision. But Stam, to give this over in a public manner to every young girl on the street, that she should think that irregardless of where she's holding, this is her calling, Mechatesa to do that. Tzitzi Pesach clearly held the other way and said, no, this is something that Klal Yisrael's future is so dependent and so hinging on how this goes, that it's okay if simple people are Meiser Nefesh to prevent this from becoming law. Now, that's in regards to the Yehareg Val Yavar segment of the Sugya. There's a whole other segment of the Sugya that I want to discuss, and this is discussed at length by Reb the Tzitz Eliezer, Reb Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, in his Sefer Hilchas Medina, Chelik Beis. Reb Tzvi Pesach, in his early years, wrote a Sefer, Sedesvarim, it's 3 volumes, with all different halachas that were relevant to having a Jewish government in Eretz Yisrael, and Chelik Beis, which focuses primarily on laws regarding to having an army and who participates in the army and laws of the army. So in Chelik Beis, in Perek Vav, he has a chapter on Giyas Nashim. And I'll present you what the arguments for Giyas Nashim ostensibly are, and then we'll go through some of the counter arguments that the Tzitz Eliezer highlights. And these are not chedushim. These are things that you'll find in others writing on the topic as well, but he organizes it very well in this piece in Hilchos Medina. Now, the tzad that Nashim could go to the army is a simple argument. It says as follows: Hayos at that time, and potentially other times in Israel's history, Israel, when it goes to battle, is facing an existential threat. It's facing the threat of annihilation, which means that you're protecting Jews who are helpless and defenseless in the country from being killed, which would constitute a Milchemes Mitzvah according to the Rambam, the way the Rambam describes it. And for that, we have a Mishnah Mefureshes and Saita that says that by Milchemes Rishos, the Mishnah, when it delineates, based on the Psukim, all the exceptions, right? We know that who has to go out to battle is not so simple. He could turn back. He could turn back. Isha, right? Meaning anyone who's not considered in the optimal state of mind to go out to battle, be that from a ruchniistic standpoint, meaning means he's afraid that he has averis biyadai that are going to cause him to stumble and trip up in war and cause everybody to be dragged down, or someone who's not in the optimal state of mind because he just made a huge commitment to a new house or to a new wife and he hasn't had time to settle into it yet. So these people are precluded from going to battle. To which the Mishnah in Saita says, this is all talking about Bamedvar or Milchemes Rishos. When you're doing a Milchema Rishos just to go out and conquer and to gain some territory or something like that, so then there's all these exceptions. But when you're going out to Milchemes Mitzvah, so the Mishnah says, and it's on Saita and Daf Mem Daled, the Mishnah says as follows: Milchemes Mitzvah, Hakol Yotzim. Everybody goes out to battle. Afilu chasen mechadare v'kala mechupasa. Even a chasen from his cheder and a kala from her chuppah go out to battle. So it says lahedya l'chayra that by Milchemes Mitzvah, even nashim are mechuyev to mishtatev in this Mishnah. And if you look, this is not a bizarre way to read the Mishnah. The Minchas Chinuch in Mitzvah Tafresh Gimel, the Chinuch in Mitzvah Tafresh Gimel says clearly that this is the way to read the Mishnah. Meaning he asks. A steer, he's handling the mitzvah Mechikas Amalek and who's included in that mitzvah, who's not included in that mitzvah, but he learns this Mishnah Kipshutai, that it means that a woman is supposed to go out to battle. And if you look, the Rambam in Hilchos Melachim, when the Rambam brings down this din of Muhammad, the Rambam says, Bamedvar Paskins, like this Mishnah in Saitim Memdal, he says, Bamedvar more Milchemes Rishos. But Milchemes Mitzvah, afilu chasen mechadare v'kala mechupatze yotzin l'Muhammad. So the Rambam seems to be internalizing this mission and passing like it at face value, that when it comes time to Milchemes Mitzvah, so then there's no more of these exceptions. These exceptions are only when it's not a Milchemes Mitzvah. But a Milchemes Mitzvah, where Klal Yisrael is at risk, there aren't any of these exceptions, and afilu, everyone goes out to battle no matter what. So the Tzad Shekeneged, and these were some Rabbanim, and I'll leave them unnamed, who were pushing this Tzad, who said, yeah, granted, it's not so comfortable for Haredi girls to join the army, and we'll need to figure out how they could be Nizar and Sneas and etc. even in the army. But L'maisa, it's a Milchemes Mitzvah, and there not only is this okay, it's desirable. Maybe it's even a chiyuv. And some of the more Zionist leaning Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael at the time were pushing these arguments. Now the Rabbanut itself was actually kind of caught between a rock and a hard place. The Rabbanut several times came out against Giyas Banas, and later on, when the Rabbanut had a little more freedom, like when Rabbi Vadia was the Rav Rashi and whatever, they came out even stronger against women serving in the army. But at the time when this battle was being waged, the Rabbanut was a very, very shoestring operation that required heavily the funding of the government, and they were threatened very clearly that if they come out strongly against Giyas Banas, against the drafting of the Frum girls, all their funding would be pulled, and the Rabbanut's ability to take a strong position here was kind of hampered. Plus, there was an attempt to be working on it from the inside, someone who was working from within the government. So there was some sort of, like a Dante, where they didn't speak too strongly one way or the other. But the Rabbanut's ability to weigh in on this was hampered. But this was the argument that was presented by some of the more Zionist-leaning Rabbanim at the time. Now, it's a good point, right? You have a Mishnah with a Rambam that seems to paskin like this. So now Tzitz Eliezer, he starts the other way. First, he brings Klara Rayas that women do not belong in an army. And he starts as follows. He brings as follows. It's really the pasuk in Parshas Kiseitze says the Isser Layia Kli Gever Alisha V'Layilbash Gever Simlas Isha. Right? We know the Zinner of Leisilbash Kisayev As Hashem Leikacha Kalei Seila. That's the pasuk in Mefurish, that women are not supposed to dress and behave like men, and men are not supposed to dress and behave like women. Now the Gemara in Nazir and Daf Nantes says as follows: Amr of Lezben Yaakov. How do you know that a woman shouldn't go out with weapons to a battle? Before Shapasik, a woman is not supposed to wear a man's clothing. And strangely enough, and let's point this out, the Rambam in Perek Beis of Hilchos Avedis Kechavim, Paskins, he says as follows: Asher Isha Lilvos Syrian, which is like a chain mail, like an armor, because it's Layilbash, which means a woman can't wear weapons of war. She can't wear, an army uniform and go out to battle. It's Leisilbash. And additionally, he points out that the famous Gemara in Yevamos says, Klar, and Daf Samachay, the Gemara says that Ish darke l'chavesh ve'ein isha darke l'chavesh. A man goes out to do conquest. A woman doesn't go out to do conquest. The Gemara in Kedushin, likewise, I think on Daf Daled, says darke shalish lasses Muhammad ve'ein darke shalish lasses Muhammad. So he says, you see the stommiest lashon of Chazal, several places throughout Chazal, is that there's a clear favoring that men go out to battle, women don't go out to battle, to the point where it even enters halacha that it's like silbash for a woman to engage in battle and to go out dressed in an army uniform. So he says, Klar, that it would come out that the Isser is twofold. The Yitzia l'mulchama, going out to battle, is itself not allowed, because that itself is an act of silbash. And even if they don't go out to battle, and let's say they take, rear line positions where they help out with other off the battlefield stuff, but if they're wearing a uniform and they're holding weapons and etc., that's also a leisilbash. Now, he even brings a raya. There's the story with Yoel and Sisera, right? So we know that Yoel, she eventually kills Sisera, and she fools him. She goes into his tent and she pretends, or according to certain sources in Chazal, she does more than pretend that she's coming there to join him and to be with him and come on his side. And eventually, after she feeds him wine and cheese, and he gets tired and he falls asleep, so she takes a spike from the tent and she stabs it through his head and she kills him. Now, the Abarvanel points out that why did she take a spike? The sister was an army general. There must have been weapons in the tent as well. Take a sword and cut off his head. Like, well, what do you have to do with a spike? And he says because Yoel was being makbid that it's leisilbash for a woman to carry weapons and for a woman to engage in war in that way. To take a spike and just, take a frying pan and hit him over the head, that was allowed. But to engage in battle in the regular manner that a man engages in battle, that would be leisilbash, and Yoel wanted to refrain from that. And he brings several more sources in Chazal that women were clearly left out of all battles. Strangely, he favors the Abarvanel over here. There's several different places where the Abarvanel points this out throughout the Nevi'im, that women were left out of the battles. So then he addresses, you have the stira. You have the Gemara that in Saita that we said from Daf Daled, where the Gemara seems to say that I feel kala mechupasa, that all you could, so to speak, say all these rayas that you're bringing me, the tzliazah that you're bringing me, that a woman doesn't go to battle, that's by Mechemes Rishos, 100%. Mechemes Rishos, women doesn't go. But a Mechemes Mitzvah, women do go. I have a Gemara in Saita. So to that he brings, and there's a Radvaz that says this. Radvaz says, the Radvaz addresses this kasha kind of. The Radvaz in Perek Zayin of Hilchos Melachim, Radvaz asks a kasha. He says, V'chiderech hanashim lasas mulchama? The Ketani v'kala mechapasa? He's asking on the Rambam. The Rambam says, kala mechapasa. He says, is this the derech for women to go to do battle? And he asks it differently. He says, Aiva aksiv, kol kvud vas melech panima. It's pasha not tznius. We know there's a chiyuv of tznius on women, and exactly what the parameters of tznius is. Their ice, their abanon is a shmuz for a different time, and exactly. But klar, we know there's a chiyuv for women to be tzanua. Kol kvud vas melech panima. So he asks, how is it possible to say that women are supposed to go to war? Afilu kala mechapasa. Doesn't make sense to say that. So the Radvaz says two terutzim. He says, Yesh leimer the hachikamar. The kivan the chasen yoytze mechadarai. Since the chasen is going out mechadara, kala yoytze mechupase. The hainu she'einu neheges yemei chuppah. It just means to tell you that Sheva brachas is batal. Since the chasen is going out to battle, the kala alone is not gonna. We're not gonna fear Sheva brachas for the kala alone. So afilu chasen mechupase mechadara v'kala mechupase means be mevatel Sheva brachas. It's over. The chasen goes out to battle. That's the teretz number one that the Radva says. Oid kasav, he says, the after the mechames mitzvahs hanashim. He says, by Islamic armies, you'll see that the minig is women constantly come to bring food and prepared food for their husbands who are fighting to the front line of the battles. So it doesn't mean that women participate in the army, in the battle, in any organized fashion. It just means they continue to look after their husbands who are on the battlefield. And this, he says, could mean what it means, is that she has a job to feed her husband who's on the front lines. So says the Tzitz Eliezer, this is the Yishuv Advarim. It says when the Rambam says, that she goes out to do a battle, Mechames Mitzvah, he says the Rambam doesn't mean that a woman goes to battle, because that would be a steer to the Gemara inside the Gemara Nazir that says clearly that it's Leisilbash and a woman doesn't do this. He says all it means is that a woman joins the support system in a different way, or in this he favors this Taretz Deradaz. He says Kipshuta, it just means that Sheva Brachas is batal and there's no more Sheva Brachas. And he brings several more Rambam along this vein. Whoever wants could look at it on their own. But Yech Shia, he strongly brings this tzad that women do not belong in the army. Now, interestingly enough, Tzvi Pesach Frank himself wrote a mavai of sorts to Chelik Beis of Hilchas Medina, and in it he addresses many nekudis that are addressed in the Sefer. But he does talk about in the beginning a little bit about the Giyas Bana situation himself, and I can read you from his own words where he's writing about the severity of it and why this was something worth pushing back on to such an extent. He says as follows. He says, "V'hinei." He says, "V'toivasa ba'amda al mishmar liyachad hadibur begoydel mechitzas hashichur lebnei Torah misheret hatzava." He says, "You did very well in the sefer to really, really establish why bnei Torah need to be parted from serving in the army. They're doing holy work. V'chein," he says, "B'nois Yisrael hadin noisin shalei l'shavdum l'tzava." The halacha is that they shouldn't be meshobet to go to the army. V'nekiyim yu lebeisam. They should go home. Zel teirase v'zel melachas beisam ulepikucha. U'kamay sheherach kvay teirase v'zel perek dalad u'perek vav u'mi yitein, he says, shedvarav hatzaydkim. Who would give, HaKadosh Baruch Hu should help, that your accurate words, yimtzu as nayim tahayris, l'kabbalas ha'emes v'atzedik. They should find good, kosher ears to hear them and accept them. It shouldn't be like you're talking to a deaf person who doesn't hear the voices of the people talking to him. He says, this is several years. He says, we've seen HaKadosh Baruch Hu's tremendous rachmanis. Lishbor ol goyim me'al tzavreinu. He broke the oil of the goyim upon us. V'yachad kulanu re'inu v'samachnu b'shuasan she'Yisrael. And he's referring to the fact that Klal Yisrael, the formation of Eretz Yisrael, that, Klal Yisrael in mass, in tremendous numbers, was able to go back to Eretz Yisrael. He says, but then he says, what happened is, we never dreamed, we never dreamt that the Satan would join us over here also. To join in this new encampment of Jews and be matal the chayv of the draft on Jewish girls. Something that in our entire history never transpired. It says, it says, even Goyim, all over the world, any Yehudim were not parrots in this type of gather of tznius to force women to come to the army. I think back then they were saying one of the arguments they used against this law was that the only other country, I think maybe even, it could be it's even true still today, the only other country that has mandatory draft for women is South Korea. I'm sorry, is North Korea. So this, he says, no one does this. He says, Gam kazeh, boifin gam kazeh laharchik b'nais Yisrael b'zraya mi beis harayim. And he's talking about Sheirut Lumi and Giyas Banas all fajumbled in one, and I'm not going into the details of separation, but those were two different steps, two different phases in the law. But he says to separate girls from their homes, Asher Neim, Royas, V'chalis, L'chancham, Baruch, Hatayr, V'Masera, their parents care to raise them with the proper values, the proper hashkafa. He says the government wants to do this, and it's only a blindness. And then he points out, he references this that we made note of, that there were Rabbanim on this side, and there was Rabbanim who came. He says, and it's pasha to him that if there were to be unity amongst all the Charedim, and everybody would be on the same page, they would not have been able to do this. This wouldn't have been a conversation. He says, it's only because amongst ourselves we're not fully united, and we have Rabbanim who agree, who are coming around on their side, who are saying that it makes sense. He says if everyone would agree, it would be Mekoyim Banu Le'yinuach Shevet HaRosh Al Gerel HaTzadikim. But what could we do? There are people with blood on their hands, he says, who are participating and allowing this to happen, and therefore we have to keep fighting. And he goes on to several other issues in regards, but he's clearly writing the temperature that he expressed in all of his dealings in this regard, that this is Mamish Yehar Yavar, and the Nitzchias of Klal Yisrael is dependent on pushing back at this thing. Now, I see I was Myrich a little bit here, but I just want to share. There was a meeting that took place between several Gedolim and Ben Gurion, where they discussed somewhat in detail the idea of Giyas Banas. Now, it was Rav Tzvi Pesach Frank, Rav Zalman Meltzer, and the Chazon Ish's brother, Meir Karelitz, and together with Rav Menachem Parush, who was a government operative or an askin at the time, they went to meet Ben Gurion in the government offices in Yerushalayim. And for this, we have, basically minutes of the conversation. I'll read you some of them, where the conversation took place, where I'll read you a little bit of the back and forth. Ben Gurion says, they sat down, and Ben Gurion says, he asked Rav Meir Karelitz how the Chazon Ish is doing, the two brothers. He wanted to know who's older, who's younger, a little small talk. Okay, then he asked Rav Tzvi Pesach, so, what are we here for? What are we talking about? So Rav Tzvi Pesach told him, we came to educate the Rosh Memshalah what the halacha's perspective is on the isser of drafting women to the army, and even Sherut Lomi in any B'chol Tzura Shehi. He says, therefore, we're asking you to be mevatel this gzeira. To which Ben Gurion said, I can't, it's up to the Knesset. It's a law that was passed in the Knesset. The Knesset has to be mevatel this law. To which Rav Tzvi Pesach told him, we're fearful that if this law is not mevatel, it's going to be a kiyum of the pasuk of Banecha, Buneisecha, Nesunim, La'am Acher. Your children are given La'am Acher, meaning it's going to be an unrecognizable nation. It's not going to be a nation. So Ben Gurion protests and he says, La'am Acher, how could you say that? Tzvi Pesach says, the Medrash darshans La'im Acher, to a different mother. Meaning a mother is the Akaras Abayas, a mother raises the children. And if you're going to do this and send our girls out to the army or to Sherut Leumi, it's going to be La'im Acher. They're not going to be able to raise it anymore. So, to which Ben Gurion says, the pasuk should say it. He says, that's the drash. Okay, fighting back and forth. Now, so to which Rav Tzvi Pesach tells him, if the Rosh Memshalah thinks that you don't have to be mitchashev with our opinion, because we're a miyut, he says, don't forget, there's many, many other Jews throughout the world and throughout, Gullus, whatever, who agree with us. We're not the miyut. Now, eventually, Rav Tzvi Pesach, in his passionate delivery of this message to Ben Gurion, he starts crying, and the other two Rabbanim are sitting quietly. He says, we're begging you to please be mevatel this chayik, take it away. Now, so Ben Gurion says, I first want to make sure that this is an opinion that all of you have. This is an opinion that everybody shares. He says, what does Rav Meltzer think about this? So Rav Zalman says, I agree. What does Rav Karelitz think about this? He says, I agree as well, that this is the Das Torah and the Inyan. So, and Rav Meir Karelitz, I think, even said that we're mefached, chas v'shalom, that if this goes through, it'll be mekoyim the pasuk v'leisaki haaretz eschem b'tumah eschem, meaning the kiyum, that Klal Yisrael will get thrown out of Eretz Yisrael because we're not keeping the Torah. So which Ben Gurion says, Al tiftach peh l'satan chas v'shalom. So Rav Meir Karelitz answers, that's why we're here. We're here to avoid this from happening. So then Ben Gurion says, listen, I'm sitting in front of you, B'yiras HaKavod. I know that I have to be very delicate when I talk to you. The Greiser Rabbanim, I don't want to be Merah Halacha V'nei Rabbi. But L'maisa, there are other Rabbanim who agree with me, and we're only talking about, Sheirut Lomi, it's not such a big deal. To which Tzvi Pesach retorts back, the conversation goes on. Ben Gurion tells him, there are other Rabbanim who agree with me, Mechatesa, that your position should be so much valued above theirs. To which Tzvi Pesach tells him, it could be their Gedolei Torah, but they're not Paiskim. We're Paiskim, and we're telling you what the halach is. So Ben Gurion tells him, no, it's Rabbanim Gedolim B'Torah Balei Halacha. They're Balei Halacha also. So which Tzvi Pesach retorts and says, so Ben Gurion tells him, K'tzat anava harav Frank. Like a little humility. I mean, I know you're a Rav, but the only Rav. So he says, so Tzvi Pesach tells him, he says, Tislach li Rosh Memshalah, forgive me, Honorable Prime Minister, you didn't go to yeshiva. How could you tell me to be humble, to be humility? Maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong. I'm telling you that it's not possible to have Rabbanim who are Paiskim who could hold like this. So if you tell me they are, obviously they're not real Rabbanim. So then Ben Gurion tries to convince a little more. The conversation goes on, and I'm not going to read every detail of it, but suffice to say, it was a fascinating conversation that took place in Ben Gurion's office between these Gedolim. And the end of the story is that the Charedische Yiddishkeit in Eretz Yisrael stood firm following the Dastorovitz Gedolim and didn't bend and felt that this was something that was worth fighting with, business safe mamish. And but it's a kind of a rift, I guess, that never really healed, meaning the two opinions and the animosity that exists because of it, one could say never truly dissipated or went away. But this is another episode worth highlighting in the sugya of kanois and protest and civil disobedience.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.